In this video, we continue to consider how risk control was handled in the two case studies. In particular, we're going to be looking at evaluation. We begin again with the GLMRS risk assessment done by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And right now, you're looking at the GLMRS report, page 64, and this figure is showing you the alternative development process. Because this study did an excellent job on this particular aspect of the risk management process, let me blow this up so that we can consider it. Not so much in detail, but at least get a flavor for what they did. You see, when they began to start, they inventoried aquatic nuisance species that were non-native and not established in both basins. They identified 39 aquatic nuisance species of concern. Over here on the right, we see they began to collect data on those 39 aquatic nuisance species, and they conducted risk assessments on all 39 of the species. Meanwhile, they began an inventory of aquatic nuisance species options or controls. The blue box here marked inventory. They identified over 90 aquatic nuisance species controls, and then they developed some screening criteria. If the control was going to be ineffective, they would discard it. If the control would not be available in the proper time frame, they discarded it and would not consider it further. Those that were effective and available within the proper time frame became possible measures. They began to develop strategies and alternative risk management options from those possible measures, and came up with the 8 alternatives that we examined in the other video. For each of these alternatives, they reassessed the risk of the 13 high and medium aquatic nuisance species to find out how they would change with the plans in place. So this gave them a with project risk of establishment, and this could be compared to the without project risk rating, and the difference between those two defined the risk reduction. So with that as their basic process, let's have a look in a little bit more detail at what they did. Here you see the discussion of their alternative plan evaluation, how they began to evaluate their plans. And now I want you to look at table 2.4, where they had some specific screening criteria. This enables the decision making to be based on evidence. They were using life cycle cost of the project, impacts to waterway users, impacts to waterway uses, and also a consideration of whether a particular activity was required by law or some sort of policy. So let's scroll down a couple of pages. And here we have the evaluation table. This was used for the early screening, so this will differ somewhat from the finished plans. But you can see here, for example, aquatic nuisance control technologies without a buffer zone. The lakefront alternative, it ranked 3rd in life cycle cost. It affected flood risk management. The users were non-commercial navigation. This measure was removed from consideration because of the high cost, it ranking 3rd, and other significant impacts. So you can see they've documented their decision process here, and they've done that rather well. Once they got down to the 8 plans, however, the evaluation criteria changed. This is an evaluation of the plans. If you look in the rows would identify plans, and the columns identify the decision criteria that were used to evaluate these plans. This very first column with the stars is indicating the effectiveness of the risk reduction. So a 4-star plan provides greater risk reduction than a 1-star plan. You see the other criteria include the number of years it would take to implement any negative environmental impacts, negative water quality impacts in the Chicago area water system or in Lake Michigan, the cost of water quality mitigation measures, flood risk management impacts, the mitigation of flood risk management costs. We are now over in this column here. Then they looked at impacts on commercial cargo costs, non-cargo navigation impacts, the complexity of the regulatory compliance, and then the cost of the plan. So they took all of these criteria into effect in evaluating plans. At this point, the project has been completed and this information has been forwarded back to Congress of the United States, who at this point will assume the role of risk managers and decide which, if any, of these plans to pursue further. Let's jump over now to the Vibrio. In our previous video, we were taking a look at the answers to the questions provided by risk assessors. And part of that was the effectiveness of the measures. In the case of the Vibrio parahemolyticus risk assessment, they didn't use as many criteria. There was a simpler sort of consideration for risk control. Here they were looking at the number of illnesses. That was the primary criterion upon which a decision would be based. And this table here, table 7-4, gives us a good summary. Notice that the rows are geographic regions of the United States, and the columns in this case are indicating different future scenarios. The baseline is basically saying if the federal government does nothing about this problem of Vibrio in raw oysters, we can expect about 2,800 illnesses annually. If you require immediate refrigeration of the oysters upon harvest, that can be reduced from 2,800 to just about 400 illnesses. The 2-log reduction refers to a freezing option. If you require the oysters to be frozen, we can reduce the number of illnesses to 30. And the 4.5 log reduction refers to a cooking option. If you require oysters to be cooked, you could reduce the number of illnesses to virtually 0. So you can see here 3 specific measures. Others were considered, but this gives you an idea of how they arrayed and presented the information to decision makers. There were more than just illness criteria considered, however. Clearly, if you require all oysters to be cooked, that removes the option of eating raw oysters from the consumer, and that would be unacceptable to consumers. Likewise, freezing oysters can be perceived to alter the quality of the oyster. And so there were other criteria that entered into play. But this gives you an idea of the range and the manner in which different agencies approach the risk control task of evaluating the alternative measures.